dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the 817 podcast, where we talk about news, politics, trends, business, culture, everything going on in Fort Worth and Tarrant County. EJ, how are you feeling today?
Good. I don't know if my voice sounds like it's not existent. I was at a concert, went to Coldplay last night, and it was cool. But man, driving was a debacle. I'm not lying. Me and Monica left at 6:30, and we didn't get into the stadium to 8:55. So, you know who hasn't voted? This guy. So, Proposition A, I'm not voting for it. You converted me, Jimmy. I want public trans from Fort Worth to Dallas, downtown to Cotton Bowl, in a good way, even at nighttime, because it was a debacle at nighttime. We didn't get home to 1:30 in the morning. Crazy.
And that's one of the very, very rare times where I think it might have actually been faster to take the TRE and then wait for the DART and whatever other bus to get down there, which is saying something.
Yeah.
If it's faster in our current public transit to get somewhere than it is driving and parking, something went wrong.
Yeah. And I mean, like for Dallas Mavericks game, it's always great to do that on the way there. Yeah. But now
you got to catch the one train.
Yeah.
Like you got to sprint out of the stadium to make sure you're on that one train. Otherwise, you're getting an expensive Uber home.
Yeah, and that's a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
Like, what if it comes down to the last shot? You know, Luka does a boogie and then he hits the three, something like that, and you can't watch it because your behind got to go to TRE.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Come on now. They played like a 45-minute encore. We didn't get out there like 11:30. So, anyways, it was good though. Good stuff. You though, you had a little shindig. Casa turned 100.
Yeah, we celebrated 100 years of our house existing. It hasn't fallen over yet. I tried to dig through real estate records to figure out like the exact date that it was deeded. But records get a little hazy after like 1950, and so I think I got back to like 1955 before I couldn't find anything else. But yeah, celebrated 100 years of our house existing, which that's kind of cool.
Hey, maybe it can be a national treasure. We don't even know. You know, Fort Worth, is trying to take someone's national treasure, but we'll see. Anyways, yeah, man, people voting today, and obviously this pod can't get you to do anything about that because this comes out on Monday morning, and we're recording on Saturday because it's Mother's Day, and we care about our mothers. All right, so what we're going to talk about, though, big story is going to be there's a lot going on in the country, and we're just going to address the importance of voting and how Texas matters in all of this. But let's go ahead and hit our short stories. 3 short stories, big story, wins and losses. Thank you for being here. Let's make it happen. All right, so we're going to jump in first to the Fort Worth graduation. So the families of Fort Worth students graduating from high school this month and in early June will not have to pay for parking at Dickies Arena after Rainwater Charitable Foundation said it will cover the costs. Now, this was something that, why is this news? Well, it's news because that wasn't going to be the case. People were going to have to spend $20 for parking at Dickies Arena, and that means, kids who are graduating who haven't had an in-person graduation, who knows how long, a real one, now is going to legit pay the price as if, pandemic for 2 years wasn't enough. So the cost of parking at the city-owned Dickies Arena is managed by Trail Drive Management, which is the $20 value fee. What's the crazy is this Trail Drive Management is a nonprofit set up to manage and operate Dickies Arena. So I'm confused there. I don't know what's going on, but Jimmy, what you got?
Yeah, I think a key phrase you said was city-owned Dickies Arena. publicly subsidized Dickies Arena.
Yep.
And we can't waive the parking fees for a high school graduation. Like, I get having to pay for parking. I mean, I kind of don't, but I understand that we have to profitize everything that exists in our lives. So the idea of paying for parking for a concert, football game, whatever, high school graduation, and the city can't say, yeah, of course we're not going to pay for parking for that. Like, you have already subsidized this stadium. Absolute insanity.
Yeah.
Like, this having to be news and this having to get coverage is just, what a shame. Like, what a stain for the city that we can't look at a high school graduation and say, oh yeah, of course you don't have to pay to park here.
Yeah. And shout out to Rainwater Foundation. But by the way, they're actually a very, to me, if anybody's really trying to do some important stuff in Fort Worth, as a family, fund, I think, they're downtown, but they do a lot of work, and education and other parts. I mean, and I there's a lot of bright, very smart employees there who do stuff in other fields. So I think that's a shout out there for Rainwater. And honestly, this story would probably be just like a loss on a busy day, like a busy story week, like last week. But this week is slower than what we had last week, especially last week because it was so busy.
Yeah, overall, just really sad that we have to even think about having to pay to go see your kid or your loved one graduate high school. Like, just ridiculous. And it just a form of gatekeeping and keeping people away from graduation that people like Greg Abbott maybe don't think should be educated.
I wonder if they paid parking for Greg Abbott's thing. If anyone could find that for us, did Greg Abbott's little shindig have paid parking? If anyone could tell us, that'd be good to know. All right, so man, sometimes we're just so good off the fly, Jimmy. Me and you are like Kobe and Shaq sometimes, man. All right, so we're gonna move into the second story, which is going in a positive direction. Aaron Dean, obviously, the Aaron Dean trial for Tatiana Jefferson. The judge said the delays will be to June, but this case will be tried in Tarrant County. The new trial date is June 23rd. The judge ruled on Wednesday that the murder trial for the Fort Worth police officer who shot and killed Tatiana Jefferson in 2019 will not be moved out of Tarrant County, but it will be delayed for another month. Aaron Dean's judge and team was really trying hard to get it out of here. I think this is a good move for all of us.
Yeah, following along, like the reporting as it was happening live, like it took a couple of days. Basically, they just watched hundreds of news clips that maybe were relevant, maybe weren't, and were very repetitive. But the logic that Aaron Dean's defense was trying to use was that because of quote-unquote inflammatory statements made by then Mayor Betsy Price, the police chief, national attention, made it so that there could not be an unbiased trial here in Fort Worth in Tarrant County. To me, by that same logic, like, you're quoting national news on this and state news on this, you can't move it anywhere to have a quote-unquote unbiased trial. And so this is maybe 4 or 5 months ago that we talked about the potential negative of attempting to get this moved. And I just think it is really important that this take place in Tarrant County. And I would say that that's a a big win for the prosecution. I don't know. I haven't like seen anybody look into the health situation that the defense is saying that their main attorney continues to have, but my man, they've been arguing that my man's sick for like 6 months now.
Yeah.
There's got to be some point where the judge is like, hey, time to move on.
Yeah.
Like, get a different main attorney, or like we gotta get the party going because this has been delayed for far too long.
Yeah, COVID's 5-7 days, man. You know, COVID is you can't have it that long. You know,
and it's like whatever he has going on is obviously like personal and hopefully not life threatening,
or just using the rules.
Yeah, because at this point it just feels kind of comedic that we continue to have this argument that
because if you're this sick, then this doesn't mean anything to you, and you're just like, look, I gotta go.
Yeah,
I got more priorities to deal with.
Yeah, if you're this sick, you shouldn't be trying this case. Like,
yeah, you got bigger priorities. Yeah, you know, I feel like Aaron Dean just could have said, yeah, this is what Betsy Price said. It's this is unexcusable. She said that, you know, Fort Worth should do something about it, but obviously she doesn't really mean that because Black Lives Matter doesn't mean anything to her. Look at this actual news that she just came out with, running for judge. So really, she's just out to get me because she has vendetta against me. She's so skewed because she really doesn't care about Black Lives Matter. So all of this, her acting like she cares about Black Lives Matter, is fraud. So I can't do it in Tarrant County. I can be your judge. Just let the guy go. You know, let the guy go. I'm healthier than an ox.
Attorney.
Yeah, healthier than an ox. You know, attorney at law. Oh man. All right. So next short story we're gonna dive into. This one is like a classic Fort Worth story. Like we've been doing this so long now. I am no longer like excited about Fort Worth stories where it's like Fort Worth has this, doesn't spend any money on this. You know what I mean? Like it's just like you can just find a story. So the new one like that for Fort Worth is Fort Worth Department for Historic Preservation is one of the city's top. Fort Worth's Department for Historic Preservation is one of the city's top 10 most endangered places, according to the preservation nonprofit Historic Fort Worth. This is the second time that the department has made Historic Fort Worth's top 10 list, which aims to educate the public about historic buildings and steer property owners toward grants and tax credits that aid in restoration efforts. Fort Worth has roughly 8,500 properties on its list of endangered places, but only one full-time staff member to keep up with a list of state requirements, keeping the city eligible for grants and a 25% state tax credit. Dallas, by comparison, has 4,000 listed properties and 5 full-time staffers. San Antonio has 11,000 properties and 21 full-time staff members. So the quote here by Jerry Tracy, Executive Director of Historic Fort Worth, says, "We need the city to be a champion for historic preservation. We don't want to live in a generic America. These are Fort Worth's most endangered places."
It really does fill in all of the Mad Libs of a Fort Worth story.
Yeah.
Fort Worth has X, didn't take care of it, and now we have to do Y to fix it. And I think like the thing that stood out to me the most about this story was that we have more than double the number of endangered buildings as Dallas does. And it just stands out to me as like, we know that we do a terrible job of taking care of our cool old buildings. And it's embarrassing because then we just continue to see these generic apartment complexes, generic strip malls pop up. And it's all because we chose not to take care of the really cool things that we had. Now, this endangered buildings list does come with incentive for the people who own and would potentially develop these buildings, where you're eligible to get up to 25% of the construction costs back for preserving these spaces. So even though they're obviously going to be expensive to fix, there's potential that you recoup a lot of that cost or extra cost, and maybe it sort of levels out. But it would be nice if this didn't get there in the first place, if we didn't let all these buildings get there in the first place.
Yeah. And I started thinking about the whole idea of Fort Worth being a real estate city. And then I started thinking, okay, maybe, you know how people are with government and using tax and laws and this to profitize everything, right? Mm-hmm. So I wonder, if we're so real estate heavy in Fort Worth, is there any tax incentives to buy up these places? Is there a tax incentive to, obviously you get a 25% state tax credit. So it's like, do you, having these buildings are just beneficial in the portfolio, or like we have more because does our real estate companies leverage the fact that we don't have any economic growth to fix them like Dallas does? So because all these people don't know what to do with all their buildings, hey, let's make it on historic so that we can get a 25% state tax credit, but really don't have any interest in actually vitalizing anything. I'd be interested to know what kind of detail there is around this process, because it just seems like something that could be really beneficial for real estate investors or real estate people, and they're just really doubling down on this in Fort Worth because they don't have a way to actually build something that's attainable in Fort Worth. I don't know.
Can I share a fun fact about the Barry Theater?
Come on
now.
So
the Barry Theater's on this list. When we first opened the Granbury, like first week, I'm sitting up there. It's maybe 2:00 in the afternoon on I think it was a Friday. And we didn't have a movie then. Guy comes walking in. He's like looking around. He's like, hey, I was just at, the Fort Worth Magazine office. You guys were in there. He was like, oh, this is really interesting. I'm going to go check it out. I figured I should, since I own the Barry Theater. And I was like, oh, interesting. And so we started talking. We walked next door to Craftwork and are having coffee together. And he was like, yeah, I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. And we thought we had a church lined up that we were going to, redo it for. They would help with that also. And, they would inhabit it, like they're new, but they're growing and are looking for a permanent space. I was like, oh, interesting. He was like, yeah, but like last minute we started to get some like weird vibes from them and weren't really comfortable with them being in there. Do you know what church it was?
Our Mercy Culture?
Yes.
Wow.
They're
how crazy.
Like, yeah. And I think that they were within like days of like signing a final agreement. So Mercy Culture obviously inhabits that weird building right off of 35. But originally it looked like they were going to move from when they were meeting at Pascal High School to the Barry Theater.
That's nuts. Yeah, that's scary.
So the Barry still, that person has sold it now. The Barry's passed hands a ton and nobody has known what to do with it, which I think tells how potentially expensive it might be to redo. And it's also just kind of in a weird spot on an island by itself. But yeah, it was almost the original home to Mercy Culture.
So let's go ahead and dive into the big story. Big story. This was Jimmy's kind of ideation of what we should do for the big story because it was a slow news week. But I think what we're going to talk about is really important. And obviously, if you listen into this pod, you get this. But I think the kicker here is, does our friends get this? Does our adults give this? Does our community or where we work, the churches we go to, do they get this? And I think we need to have these kind of discussions. So, Jimmy, go ahead and take us into the big story.
So obviously this week there was some jarring yet not entirely unexpected national news, and that is that the opinion on the case brought to the Supreme Court that would potentially overturn Roe v. Wade was leaked, and that opinion, although not entirely unexpected, uses a train of logic that is potentially very harmful for a lot of other issues, both in Texas and nationally. And so we kind of wanted to talk about the importance of voting and why and how that comes to fruition, not just with legislation, but now we're also seeing in the Supreme Court. The opinion is written by Justice Alito, who is known to be the most conservative justice on the court. His wife is a profoundly fanatic QAnon believer. He has only ever crossed party lines to the political or to the more liberal justices' opinions once in his entire Supreme Court career. And it was honestly the opinion is one, just wrong, two, poorly written, and three, very dangerous. Essentially, he ignores the Ninth Amendment, the amendment of enumerated rights, that just because something is not in the Constitution doesn't mean that it is not a right. And then also spins the right to privacy to essentially not exist, basically saying that because of the right to privacy does not justify abortion, and that right has been used in a number of other significant Supreme Court decisions, whether potentially around contraception, gay marriage, interracial marriage. All of these opinions will come under fire in the coming years. And a lot of the reaction has been obviously people being scared for their rights, people trying to figure out how to mobilize what they can do to potentially stop this or sway this, and a lot of finger pointing. One that it has, and the finger pointing that has primarily happened, I believe, has come around the 2016 election and Donald Trump, who was able to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices.
Yeah.
And it really flipped the dynamic of the Supreme Court. But I think it's short-sighted to look only at 2016 and say that that is the cause of where we are. We're 40 to 50 years deep of Republicans very strategically and passionately going out to vote and filling local and state elections with conservatives who have jumped on board now with a lot of these far, far right opinions and strategies to, essentially take us back to the 1930s, 1950s when it comes to the rights of non-white men. And I think that it's been an emotional week for everybody thinking about the potential windfall of all of this. But we started this podcast because we saw an issue with elections in Fort Worth and the really news education in Fort Worth, and wanted to be some small conduit of helping people stay more informed. And I think that that's the step we have to take, is how do we rally our friends, family members to go vote for some small, bond election in May, and then go vote again in 3 weeks for another, for special elections. How do you combat 40 years of strategic direction where Democrats have largely been focused on flashy national positions, and really left a dearth of emptiness when it comes to lower level elections, especially outside of big cities.
Yep. You go ahead and dive into what you see as the potential next wave of consequences, as Governor Abbott's talking about public school education for immigrants. You also kind of talk about even just the crazy thing of gay marriage being discussed and multiracial marriage being discussed. All these other things that we've been able to get past that's now up in question.
Yeah, I think that's the scariest piece, is that there's no inference happening here. Almost immediately after this opinion leaked, which we don't know which side leaked it. I have read very compelling arguments for people thinking a liberal clerk leaked this, and just as coherent arguments for it being done by a conservative justice's clerk. But immediately, Ben Shapiro, a number of conservative senators, Greg Abbott, have come out saying that the logic for Loving versus Virginia, which legalized and protected interracial marriage, Obergefell, which legalized gay marriage, they're coming out and saying that we need to question those. And even in the opinion, Justice Alito references those as standing on shaky ground. So we know full well what the roadmap is, that they're coming for gay marriage. They're coming for interracial marriage, which would essentially turn these into states' rights issues. So I think it's I think it's about 30 states where abortion laws would change almost immediately if and when Roe v. Wade gets overturned. And I think it was maybe 12 states that would almost immediately make gay marriage illegal or not recognized again. And then the big kicker that Greg Abbott came out with this week is that he wants to challenge free public education to children of undocumented immigrants. So the case Plyler versus Doe requires states to offer free public education to all students, which includes children of undocumented immigrants. Now, on this current election, you're listening to this Monday, we literally just voted on 2 Texas state props that would increase the homestead tax exemption that goes towards public education. We are already directly trying to defund public education in Texas. And now Greg Abbott is saying that he doesn't want to educate every kid in this state, regardless of citizenship status. What is the next step to that? The next step to that is that we can pick and choose who gets to go to school. Kids got behavioral issues. We don't want to educate them. Kid has special needs. We don't want to provide the funding for it. We are very deliberately trying to decrease the enrollment in public schooling so that we can continue to justify underfunding it and then turn it into a profit center for somebody. I don't know who this is that's in Greg Abbott's pocket for whatever charter schools or private schools are there saying, hey, like, let's get rid of public education. But they're coming for it. Texas already has one of the worst public education systems in the country, and we are very, very actively trying to make it worse and worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think even as, like you said, we get close to 2 years on this pod, and why we kind of started the pod is that I don't think me and you are that abnormal in Fort Worth. Our thoughts, our ideas, our perspective. And when you grow up in a world where being different is now not something that people attract to. It's something that I think we're just living in this world where everybody wants to read the news that fits their soul. They want to go to the church that fits their soul. They want their kids to now go to schools that fit their beliefs. And there used to be an exploration in the world to want to see different. And that if you're sitting at a conference and there was someone who looked different than you, you would go sit next to them because you would want to know more about them. And today we run to our sides and we don't embrace different. There are these other voices and these other people who still deserve a voice, or we should be considerate of, because we value different, and different is good. And so it's just like everything you talk about is, I feel like somehow we got into a world where we don't want different. We just want everything to be like us.
And the crazy thing about, like, when we're talking specifically about Roe v. Wade, 5 conservative justices in 1973 voted for Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
Like, this was not a liberally packed court that was pushing this. Like, overturning Roe v. Wade and being anti-abortion has always been a fringe, far-right opinion. Even today, like, the opinion of Roe v. Wade, like, has not changed, where over 70% of Americans support it. And now, like, we have states immediately this week that are drafting up new laws and passing new laws so that the moment that it gets overturned, abortion becomes illegal, criminalized, and even life-saving treatment for women is being criminalized.
Yep.
Like, if your embryo gets in the wrong place and you have to have a life-saving procedure where that embryo was never going to live, that was never going to become a human being, but when it bursts, it will literally kill you, you can and will go to jail for having that procedure to save your life. And these people try to say that they're a pro-life party. Like, they are actively endangering the lives of so many women that you know. Like, if you can say definitively that you don't know anybody that has had an abortion or a procedure that would be considered abortion or illegal under Texas's new laws, Louisiana's passing one of the most conservative laws, you are lying to yourself, because it really is just saying that you're not trusted enough by people to have that information confided in you, because this is so common and so life-saving for so many women. I mean, it just like has gotten me so fired up to see this direct path created, starting with this decision and soon to be followed by so many more that really tear away at the fabric of this country, of the original idea that we're going to come and create a place with religious and political freedom to escape suppression in other countries.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I saw the statistic that 60% of abortions are women who already have kids, and 75% of them are under the poverty line. You know, you say they're trying to not make a decision, you know, that these people, you know, are where they are because of their circumstances. And you know how brave that has to be, how hard that has to be to know that, hey, I can't, you know, or maybe this is not the best, you know, and it has to be awful.
Yeah.
And then you want them to have their kid, but then you don't want to pay for their public education.
Right. And when we've mentioned a few times today about like profitizing everything, like America is just about profitizing everything. And when decisions like this get made, or you see things like this come out, it's all about follow the money. Like who does this benefit, and how could they potentially be lobbying against this? And so I was thinking at first, like, you know, states are already talking about banning contraceptions and even banning IVF and like freezing your eggs. Like, that's insane. Like, that's insane. People actively trying to have kids in different ways, and you're saying that you don't want them that way. I was like, is there like a condom company that these people are backing? And then it started to hit me, like, the last couple years, we have seen for the first time ever globally and in the US a declining birth rate.
Mm-hmm.
The fastest and easiest way to generational wealth is through real estate.
Yep.
And in 20, 30 years, people owning real estate and creating their wealth through real estate now have a problem if fewer and fewer people are needing housing. What's the solution to that? Making sure that people are born right now.
Yep.
And it just kind of hit me like, this isn't about some actual belief that abortion is wrong or abortion is murder. This is another long-term approach looking at how do we protect our generational wealth for years and decades to come. And that is making sure that we turn around the current decline in birth rates.
Yep.
And to me, like, that's what it comes down to, which is absolutely disgusting that people in power continue to prioritize their own wealth and their future generations' wealth over the health and well-being of other human beings. And it's really just gross. And a lot of it comes down to the foundation that has been laid locally and statewide in Texas and in most states across the country that has allowed for these decisions to even get up to the Supreme Court. Like, if all of the appellate courts before the Supreme Court were ruling against cases like this, it wouldn't get to see its day in a Supreme Court hearing. We wouldn't be hearing about this. But because so many of the appellates are filled with conservative judges, we see cases like this actually make its way to the Supreme Court. And while the court is quote unquote supposed to be not a legislative body and nonpartisan, we clearly see that it's not that anymore.
Yeah.
And probably never was, but especially now we're seeing that it is not that.
Yeah. Well, bringing it to Fort Worth and finishing out this kind of, and I don't think we really fully hit everything we might have wanted to say or said it in the way that might have made the most sense, because I think this is the toughest part of trying to be a voice.
We're actively processing this.
Yeah. And but we have an election that just ended today. Looking at the data, 5% of Fort Worthians have voted for this election. Oftentimes, that is probably an older demographic, which also means a wider demographic.
And a wealthier demographic. So this is why it's so important for it. I don't know the age demographic makeup of our podcasts. But it is so important for you to go vote and give your voice, even if you feel like it doesn't matter. Understand, like we said, the school bond that passed for middle schools to get redeveloped in Fort Worth was 56 votes. That your vote matters so much in this local election. And these is what the ramifications we have today is for us. Not like, if anything, this year, should show us like it matters. So make sure, because Fort Worth is going to have a lot of big elections coming up, and there's another one in 3 weeks.
Yeah. So if you didn't make it out to this one, okay, I understand how hard it is, but realize the importance of it, and all how it snowballs into a thing where it doesn't seem like it's big. And now how did we get to this point? So
that's a great way to end it.
Yeah.
We are seeing the snowball has turned into an avalanche, but it's time for us to start packing our own snowball, start pushing it down the hill, and see what happens with it.
Yep. All right. So you want to hit wins and losses?
Let's do it. My loss, and we're going to continue the theme of profitizing random things. But this just came from the article about the bike trail connecting Fort Worth and Dallas, the quote-unquote super highway of trails. It's taken 10 years, which is insane that it's taken 10 years to get a much needed bike trail connecting the Metroplex. But the end of the article, the last section of the Fort Worth Report article, is, will it bring any revenue? Who cares? Literally, who cares? We need to have a bike trail because having trails like that improves the quality of life of people living here. And sure, maybe some of the areas are going to try and build up along the river and connect things to the trail to have businesses. But they shouldn't have to justify this being a good thing for the area. And it is just very, very tiring that everything in our lives as Americans has to come down to how do you profitize it and will it bring any revenue? Truly, who cares? And this isn't on the Fort Worth Report for reporting it like this. They're reporting it like this because they're having that question be asked. And people are asking, what is the purpose of this? Does it bring economic development? And one, probably, because it does add a dynamic element to the area and something that will be used by a lot of people and can be built around. But that is not the purpose of improving people's quality of lives by making the outdoors accessible to them.
Yep. You have since 2013, about $41 million has gone into this project funded by local, state, and federal dollars. The Regional Transportation Council awarded $26 million towards the project. The remaining 15 came through a combination of city funds, developer funds, and the Texas Department of Transportation.
And we're not asking like 41 million. We're not asking the question of, are these new body cameras for cops going to bring revenue?
Yeah.
And we're spending more on that. We're spending more on the CCPD fund, and we're not asking if that's going to bring revenue.
Tell them.
But the things that actively improve people's lives, we have to figure out how to profitize it. And it's just a product of late stage capitalism and seeing all of the failings that it has brought to our culture.
Now let's hit My Lost. Okay, so My Lost is continuing down the path, 3 episodes in a row. JD Granger is back in action. Man, I wish I had a mouthpiece like JD Granger where I could tell Star Telegram to write something to try to make me look not as bad about there's a story in the Star Telegram. Harrison wrote it about how JD Granger said he was trying to quit, but the reason why he was trying to quit is because they were trying to not give him his paid leave of what, $75,000, $72,000, which his contract for this consulting is to give upwards of that paid leave here. Like, realize that, guys. Like, they spend all this time to detect nepotism and to see that this is crazy that people get paid leave at this rate. And they're using their company card on a bunch of other things that expenditures.
Fort Worth Club memberships.
Yeah, Fort Worth Club memberships. And then when everyone finds out, boom, you're busted. We got you. You're so powerful that you just say, okay, let's create a consulting company. And I still get my paid leave. You know how awesome it is to walk into a bank, rob it, everyone sees you rob it, and then you do it again. And then you get to leave with it anyways. Yeah. You know how powerful that is? That's crazy. What's next? I don't know.
JD, you can buy the 817 pod for your $72,000 leave payout.
Yeah. Happy. I'm sure would be worth it for you.
And we'll stop talking about you.
Yeah. So, guys, all of this just goes back down to voting. But let's talk about wins, because we do love existing and living and trying to make the world a better place and Fort Worth a better place. That's why we talk about the hard things. I think a lot of people who act nice all day and think the world is green is actually the people I'm worried about. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about wins. What do you got?
Fort Worth and the Kimball were in the New York Times this week. The Louvre, yes, like the most famous museum in the world, bids to keep a Chardin bought by a U.S. museum in France, and that museum is the Kimball. Recently, at an auction, the Kimball bought the work of art Basket of Wild Strawberries by the 18th century French painter Jean-Simeon Chardin for $22 million at auction. Now, I was just there. I was just at the Louvre.
Did you see this painting?
Well, no. So this hasn't been at the Louvre. This has been in private collection, I believe. But I saw a number of his other works there because I think the Louvre has 20 to 40 of his other pieces there. And basically, the Louvre is trying to have this piece named as a national treasure, an artifact of France, so that under French law, the export of it can be frozen for 30 months or 2.5 years. Essentially, they're saying that this piece is a treasure of our country and we want to keep it here. I don't know. Like, I don't care that much about like the art world and art dealing. Like I think that there's a lot that has been written about the underbelly of the art dealing world and using it as for tax breaks and tax evasion. I think art is great to look at. It's great to enjoy, evaluate. And I love going to museums. But my win from this is that Fort Worth was in the national, probably international news for its world-class museums. Something other than our typical white supremacist national headlines that we tend to get. And I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, we're already 56 minutes in. There's so much I want to say to this, but $22 million for this painting. I mean, it is
insane.
And I'm into art too, or like culture and stuff. And I went to the Kimball for the African art kind of setup that they have going on now, which is super dope. Our director of the Kimball said the paintings completely mesmerize me, and it mesmerize almost anyone who sees it. Guys, we're talking I ain't at this pay level. I ain't got this kind of money to know this kind of value. It says, envisioning this painting hanging in our gallery, Kimball, I don't think anything could be more beautiful. The quality of this painting, the intimacy, the serenity, and timelessness, those are the qualities also seen in the architecture of Louis Kahn, who built Kimball. Now, guys, $22 million, you know what that pays? Fort Worth ISD kids to be able to have graduation without their parents having to spend $20, you know? I looking at this this bowl of strawberries or that, you know, you could fund what, let's say you could fund 220 kids college education. You could invest in $2 million into black and Hispanic indigenous businesses in Fort Worth. There's a lot we could do with that. And this is the thing. I love art as well, so I'm not here to say it's bad, but it's just there's so much that can go into, art and, what we're talking about here.
I think this painting is gorgeous, and I think his work is incredible. But $22 million is pretty insane. Now, granted, we're just talking about, like, quality of life. Like, I think that having world-class museums in Fort Worth improves the quality of life of people here for those that it is accessible to, which the, permanent exhibit at the Kimball is always free. So, that is a very accessible museum for anybody. But $22 million is pretty insane.
I'm too busy trying to grow real strawberries for my people, and I'm trying to grow my own, trying to grow and produce fruit. So yeah, I just, I wish one day I'll have the time to sit and do some amazing work, because it is a great painting if you're in this kind of style. So shout out to Kimball and our museums for out there hustling. But it's just crazy, how we try to profitize the bike lanes. Bike lanes or this, what would you want? And there's no ads or no, capitalism on your bike lanes.
I would take the bike lanes.
Yeah, right. Anyways,
because the Kimball already has a lot of amazing work.
Yeah. Dope. All right, so my win, I'm going to keep it short because we just hit an hour. So if you're still here, you really are an amazing human, and you really ride with us. And for that, love you. All right, because it's people like you who are going to make Fort Worth a better place, Tarrant County a better place, and live into the moment. So my win is going to be actually my narrative and perspective on Alliance, Texas. Throughout this podcast, I've talked a lot of how we need to turn Alliance, Texas into its own city. I finally listened to the Freakonomics episode about Dallas, and people were telling me to listen to it. And it was basically talking about how Dallas is a cool city. Why is everyone moving to it? But then it talked about how actually everyone's moving to Frisco, and how now Dallas and Frisco are competing, and Frisco is just kicking Dallas's butt on actually growth and getting companies and getting knowledge-based workers and all the things that runs an economy. And then so after listening to this podcast on the Freakonomics podcast, it made me think about the 40-minute competition across the country. All these big cities, right? Dallas to Frisco, Denver to Boulder, Phoenix to Scottsdale. There's these cities that are 30, 45 minutes away from big cities that are actually competing and building the economic growth. That's the same thing that's happening here in Fort Worth with Fort Worth, Texas and Alliance, Texas. All the growth is happening not in actually the city. But the kicker for us is because we have a big area, Alliance, Texas is still a part of our city, where all these other big metros have to compete against that. And for me, I think that's powerful and a highlight of why Alliance, Texas is a part of Fort Worth, Texas. And so you might hear a different narrative from me about Alliance, Texas. So if you're someone who you're like, man, I love the pod, but they always hate on where I live, I'm changing my mind here, and I'm saying, you know what? I'm happy that Alliance, Texas is here. Y'all got MP Materials to come with the mega factory for minerals. Come on now. Look at that. Changing mindsets, changing behavior.
Just stop voting to not develop our middle schools.
Yep.
I see where you're coming from, and I agree with what you're saying. But if you're going to come in here and try and continue to perpetuate our failing public schools, you're not welcome.
Yeah, and this goes exactly with the painting, right? Like, everything has a positive and a negative. And that's the thing, like, yes, I agree with you. 50% of me is like, Alliance, Texas, economically, you make sense for Fort Worth, right? But none of y'all vote to and have empathy for also the people who live in the loop, who maybe, don't go out there and live where you live and go to your schools. And that's the negative, right? So everything has like this positive. Like, I agree with you. The art painting is good for Fort Worth. But the negative is like, man, we're talking $22 million, people. Fort Worth needs $22 million to do a lot of things. So that's what's tough about everything. And I think that's why this pod is also about, like, we're trying to show, like, throughout the years, we change our mind. And, we're super progressive on things. And we're, some of us might be a little different on some things. And that's okay. Because at the end of the day, different is good. And that's what makes life interesting to explore. So yeah,
I think that's a great note to end on.
For sure.
Thanks everyone for listening this week. Next week we will be covering the election results and looking forward to another chance to go vote in a few weeks at the end of the month. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see everybody next week.
Peace.